no one who has more prolifically stood in the way of that, otherwise, I think, inevitable reform than the proud, supposedly progressive representative from the supposedly progressive city of San Francisco. Where I really get, frankly pissed off is hearing people refer to Pelosi's service on the Intelligence Committee and her service in the party leadership. And I've made this point before, but I want to make it really squarely. Democrats have been so co-opted by the national security state that I frankly don't see them in any way as the lesser of any evils now. There was an era when Democrats were the anti-war movement. That was the wing of the Democratic Party that sent Obama to Washington in 2008, only to then watch him get rolled by the Pentagon. But those years of service on the Intelligence Committee that Pelosi was talking about were enabling coups and interventions in countries around the world. These are coups, mind you, that continue to this day, right? Like in the last year, the Pentagon has enabled a coup in Niger, a constitutional coup in Pakistan. When I was running for office, this happened in Bolivia and Venezuela, but no one would talk about it as CIA coups, right? We're going to wait for historians to figure it out a generation from now. The people who are supposed to be watching this stuff, the people who are supposed to stop the NSA from co-opting the internet as a tool for global surveillance, they're not only asleep at the switch, they're not only actively complicit, they're getting rich off of it. And that does frankly piss me off. It pissed me off enough 6 years ago to light myself on fire and enter an electoral arena. It pisses me off enough today to be very grateful that I'm over it. I wish more people were pissed off ultimately, because you frankly can't pay attention to the events in Washington and around this country and around the world and not be pissed off, right? If the indigenous capital of Hawaii burning to the ground, due to ultimately, meteorological events that are driven by a climate catastrophe that these people in Washington have been engineering for half a century, while we've had more than a century's worth of warnings, it is outrageous. And I don't understand why any of these people still have their jobs. But, again, this gets back to the point of whether we live in a democracy or not, which I think is, a cruel joke at this point.
That's right. And you notice all of them are using that excuse, though, right? A lot of the politicians in DC right now are using the excuse, we have to protect our democracy. Like they all have that PR talking point. As if meanwhile, like the Democratic Party or the DNC is changing the rules so that Biden's primary challengers cannot fairly win in states like New Hampshire, Iowa, and Georgia. But we have to protect that good old democracy.
Right. I mean, it's like, democracy at the barrel of the gun or whatever we describe it as in foreign policy. They're now importing that notion of, performative, ultimately authoritarianism with performative political elements for the populace. And they're calling that democracy, but that's not what democracy is. And to call what we have in this country, bought and paid for by the highest dollar democracy, it offends, I think, the very principle of rule by the people, for, of, and by the people. That was the vision. And yes, the founders had a very restrictive vision of which people, but we've thankfully expanded that over time. When I look at America today, I don't see the people's influence anywhere in government. One of the most recent articles I wrote on Substack was about this, the constitutional side of the gerontocracy coin. People focus on, it's old people running the country who don't even have, awareness of their own absence, in the case of Dianne Feinstein, for a month from the Senate. People are so oblivious, they don't know where they are or where they've been, but they, somehow have the authority to block judicial appointments, block treaties with foreign governments, hold up crucial pieces of legislation. There's this very unfortunate corruption that has taken hold in Washington. I see it in both parties. I see Pelosi as an example of it. I see the press and its role in keeping people in the dark about that structural erosion, part of this crisis in democracy. And frankly, I think democracy needs defending. I wish any of these people who talked about it would show up. But, at the end of the day, what they're all defending is capitalism, not democracy. Whenever you hear Washington talk about democracy in the foreign policy context, it's always about promoting and defending capitalism, not democracy. We were not invading Vietnam to defend democracy. We were invading Vietnam to preserve Washington's access, or Wall Street's access, to markets. Same story in Iraq, same story in Afghanistan. I dare say it's the same story in Eastern Europe. And this idea that any of these people have any idea what democracy even means is preposterous, as far as I can tell. If she understood what democracy meant, she might have wanted to use some of that time on the Intelligence Committee to protect the rights of her constituents instead of selling them
Right.
away to the highest corporate bidder. And at the end of the day, the most crucial principles that enable democracy are transparency and accountability. And at the moment, we have none of them, right? I mean, there is a publisher currently facing a bipartisan prosecution. He has been for the last 10 years for the crime of exposing military cover-ups about military crimes. And that person, Julian Assange, has been the target of a bipartisan persecution and prosecution. Stephen Donziger, somebody
Yep.
spent time under house arrest for daring to stand up against ecocide. And I see the activists and trying to stop Cop City in Atlanta. One of them murdered, others of them being harassed and intimidated. This is a problem in Los Angeles, in Portland, when the DHS was deploying its goon squads, and activists there were taking it on the chin. We are witnessing not, I would say, the rise of fascism, but more rather its overt consolidation. Fascism has been a problem in the United States for much longer, I think, than anybody cares to realize. And it certainly did not start with the last president.